I tend to lean in more towards people that have failed and not necessarily in starting a company, but failed in something. Because if they've failed and they're continuing to press forward, it tells me that they have this ability to pick themselves back up. When it comes to investing in entrepreneurs, I like to understand from a business perspective, what have you done that didn't work out? Right. And if I find out that they have something that didn't work out, I kind of go deep into that to understand what really happened, because I do like folks that have failed. Failing is learning. Failing is like a badge of honor. So if someone has failed in the business world and they're doing it again, like that tells me a lot.
And welcome to the Venture to Victory podcast, where we look at the entrepreneurial journey from startup to exit. And man, we've got a real entrepreneurial journey today. I've got John Lusk coming at us from Luxembourg. John, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Just hanging out in beautiful Luxembourg right now.
Well, we're going to explore that a little bit because in previous conversations, I was blown away by Luxembourg and from what you told me the lifestyle was like. And I think most Americans have no clue
No,
exactly where Luxembourg is and what Luxembourg is all about. Outside of it's a cool long name, and I don't know. They speak English, they speak French. I don't really know, but I think most Americans are going to be surprised by that. But we talked about the entrepreneurial journey from startup to exit, and one of the things that's so fascinating to me about John's story is that he started off doing lots of different things, from a consultant to working at big companies to being an entrepreneur. And ultimately today, he is a venture capitalist. Within the past year, we're going to talk a little bit about that whole experience and how you got there. It's a little bit of a different path than maybe the traditional VC. And of course, investing and participating with companies in Europe may be a little bit different than folks like me in the Silicon Valley used to experience. So I'm really excited to explore all that with you today, John.
fantastic.
All right. Well, I'd like to do a little intro so everybody can become familiar with you. If they're not familiar with you, if they're not familiar with Luxembourg, we're going to find out about that. So let's rock and roll. John Lusk, you are a partner at Promus Ventures, an early stage venture capital firm investing in deep tech and applied technology companies across sectors that include space, data, and advanced computing. Some of the noteworthy successes that maybe people have heard about with Promus Ventures include Halter, which recently raised a $220 million Series E round at a $2 billion valuation. And of course, everybody knows of Whoop. And Whoop closed last week a 575 million Series G at a $10.1 billion valuation. Very exciting. At Promus Ventures, you work closely with founders and portfolio companies applying an operator's lens. And I say that because you come from the venture world as an operator, having built many companies. So bringing that lens is a very different approach for founders with a focus on commercializing, scaling, and leadership governance. You're also an author, frequently writing on entrepreneurship and business. And you've appeared in such noteworthy publications like Forbes and Business Week. I was a subscriber for 30 years. And he also wrote and published a book called The Mouse Driver Chronicles, which has been translated into 6 languages and used at more than 200 universities worldwide. Pretty amazing. Prior to working at Promus Ventures, you were CEO of Spire Maritime, a division of Spire Global, in which you started that company and grew that business from 0 to 48 million in AR and a $240 million strategic exit. Congrats. Pretty exciting. Inspire, for those that aren't familiar, is a space to cloud data and analytics company. And the idea of space and space commercialization is kind of on people's minds these days, as we've got this conflict going on around the world, and we're realizing the importance of satellites and communications and getting analytical data on the battlefield. So it's kind of in the public consciousness these days. But they're a cloud and data analytics company operating a constellation of nanosatellites collecting real-time data across maritime, aviation, and weather. As we mentioned earlier, you're a 3-time founder of such companies as Mouse Driver, which was a consumer products company, and Sway, a direct-to-consumer eyewear company. Interesting. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, you started consulting with Ernst& Young, advising companies on strategy and operations. So that has been a theme for you. No matter what you've done, you've been consulting and advising companies from the very beginning. John has a BBA in Management Information Systems from SMU, Southern Methodist University, and an MBA from Wharton. as many of my guests have had from Wharton.
Yeah,
Very
I've
prestigious
noticed that.
global one. As I said earlier, John has been living for 7 or 8 years in Luxembourg. He's an American, so that's gonna be an interesting discussion, and had been a former semi-pro soccer player. And I know every time I've ever talked to anyone that was a high-level D1 athlete or a semi-pro athlete or a pro athlete, no doubt those experiences framed internal discipline and principles that they've developed that
Mhm.
have flowed into the companies that they have built and the teams that they helped build. So very exciting. So John, let's kick it off with something fun, which is how on earth did you get to Luxembourg as an American and now a VC operating in Luxembourg? And what is life like in Luxembourg for those that don't
Okay.
know?
Can I say that we flew over here? Does that count?
Well, I think so. Unless you took a rowboat, that would be a long way.
No, around 2016, I was at a point in my career where I was, in my mind, kind of sunsetting my operational career and trying to take advantage of all the experiences that I'd garnered. I was working as an EIR at the Kauffman Foundation. I was an operating partner for a private equity firm, and I was kind of doing these different advisory engagements. And then my wife, we had just had our daughter; she was about 1 years old. My wife reminded me that when we got married, I promised her that we'd have this European experience. And she pulled me off to the side. She said, "Hey, remember that promise? Don't you think this is a great time to do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess so." And so it took me about 3 seconds of going on to Google and realizing you can't just move to another country. And so I felt like the easiest and probably the best way for me to get to Europe was to find a job. And so we kind of networked our various networks, in London because we didn't speak any other language. Through that networking, I was introduced to a husband and wife founding team that was in Glasgow. They had relocated from San Francisco to Glasgow, and that happened to be the Spire founders. And they were pre-revenue at the time, or were just at pre-revenue, and were wanting to really ramp up their data businesses. Asked me if I wanted to start their business. They gave me the option of doing that in San Francisco, Glasgow, or Luxembourg. I looked on the map. I said Luxembourg is more central. I told my wife, I don't know where Luxembourg is really. Never been there. This is a startup, so this is probably going to be a 2-year stint. We're going to live life pretty frugally so that we can travel as much as we can. So take full advantage of this. We moved to Luxembourg, localized. This was not an expat thing. This wasn't like we're gonna, pay your rent and pay your kids private school and tuition and all this stuff. We came over as localized, startup folks. Fortunately, things worked out. Inspire, the company went public in 2021 on the New York Stock Exchange, and then of course Spire Maritime was sold in 2025. But Luxembourg's fantastic. It's very small. So having lived in Manhattan, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Dallas, San Francisco, Seattle, going to Luxembourg was a little bit jarring at first, but the incredibly high quality of life. Everybody here speaks multiple languages. It's incredibly international. Our daughter's grown up here. She speaks French. Very, very safe, incredibly safe, certainly
Yeah,
compared to American cities. Very, very clean. It's just a really, really nice quality of life, and of course, it's in the heart of Europe, so you can travel around Europe. But it's I don't think you mentioned most Americans don't know where Luxembourg is. I don't think many Americans would quite understand just how good the quality of life is here in Luxembourg compared to the States. Now that being said, there are lots of things that we miss about
of
the
course.
U.S. Right? Lots of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, for first of all, I did look it up, and I guess there's about 850 to 900,000 people in Luxembourg, so less than 1,000,000.
I think that's
So
high. I think it's around 650. It
was it
seems like.
okay. Well, I've gotta have I'm gonna have to talk to Marco, who is my ChatGPT. I'm gonna tell Marco, "You're off by, like, 20-30%." So, we'll work on that. The last time we talked, I remember you telling me about how great the life experience was, and I remember, yeah,
Yeah.
sharing the story. I'd gone a couple years ago to Scandinavia and spent a lot of time in Denmark and Norway. I didn't wanna come home in a way. I just love the European lifestyle, and of course, the safety aspect. I felt people were very friendly, and you had mentioned, particularly in Luxembourg, it almost feels like a bubble compared to the rest of the world, particularly to the United States. So, I guess the big question is based on that, will you ever be coming back?
Yes, I mean, we'll
Permanently.
definitely, yeah, we'll come back to the U.S. for sure. I think the driving factor, of course, is your your kids.
Yeah,
We have a daughter, so we have one child. She's 11. She's basically
yeah,
grown up here. The education she's getting here right now, certainly when combined with the languages that she's learning, it's going to be very, very hard to replicate that.
Yeah.
That being said, we want her to have a U.S. experience. We don't want her to have some sort of acclimation to the U.S. So we would probably bring her back before high school,
Okay.
settle her in, which means we're probably here for 2 or 3 more years. But you never know. I mean, who knows with all this stuff? But we do want to come back to the U.S. I mean, we love it here in Europe, but we want to get back to the U.S. at some point.
Well, I like the idea that, you guys chose to go there on your own without a specific game plan. It wasn't like a company said, "Hey, we need you to open up an office." And so whenever those things, you're on a short leash, and you're gonna eventually come back. Like you said, it's not an expat situation. But let's jump to business for a little bit. What has the experience been for you being a European VC investor versus maybe what we would traditionally think of here in the Silicon Valley or New York?
I'd say on one hand, it's a bit more difficult, and on the other hand, it's advantageous. And let me explain that a little bit. When you're in the valley, when you're in the U.S., when you're in some of the bigger ecosystems, it's not hard to find the great companies. In fact, as soon as a great company surfaces, everybody knows about it. That makes the VC environment quite competitive
Yeah.
in the US, right? And you have to figure out how do you differentiate. You're always fighting for those founders' attention. You're trying to get them in the door. What are you going to do? It's almost like lead generation at its finest. In Europe, particularly around deep tech, those companies aren't. There's not as many. You have to actually go out and look under rocks and dig under rocks and find these companies, and that requires a bit of effort. But when you find them, you kind of look around. I mean, you're the only one around. So once you find these companies, you're kind of in, right? And once you do find the companies, you obviously, I think the biggest challenge is really trying to understand, do you have that right founder profile? I mean, obviously, every early stage VC is going to tell you that the biggest variable, biggest factor is the founder and the founding team, and do they have it?
Yeah.
Um, and nothing compares to Silicon Valley, so you can't really use that as your baseline of comparison. But that U.S. mentality versus that European mentality, particularly when it comes to early stage startups, it is different. And Europe isn't quite where the US is in terms of ecosystems. So finding those founders that have that nature to persevere, to sort of pick themselves back up, not afraid to fail. Um, it's not as pervasive here in Europe as it is in the US. And so, once you dig and you find those companies under the rock, you do still have to make sure that you're profiling and finding the right entrepreneurs that can bring you that level of success. So it's a bit more difficult, but when you do find them, there's no one, it's a little bit less competitive, right? And so
Yeah.
you feel a
Yeah.
little bit safe that no one's going to come in and eat your lunch.
Well, yes, you talked about earlier how here it's like you gotta do the lead gen to find the companies, but I just feel like here, all the companies, they're doing the lead gen. They're looking for every VC, calling on 100, trying to pitch everybody, whether it's in a hotel or their office or wherever. So when you do source these companies, are they out there looking and thinking about, "This is the way I'm gonna build my business. I'm gonna get, this first tranche of money, friends and family, then I go for seed, then go for Series A," and or is it just more like they're operating independently and you have to make a pitch to them about why venture capital money and a venture capital structure even would have value for them? How does that work over there in Europe?
I think the ecosystems by and large have gotten to this point now where companies recognize the value of investment, right? Whether it's VC investment or growth equity, they now realize that that is a necessary pathway in terms of growing and scaling businesses quickly. So they are out there looking.
Yeah.
They're out there trying to find. Now, I do think that any seasoned VC investor will tell you that the referral network is sort of your most valuable lead generation engine. And I think in Europe, that's particularly true, right? Because there's just not as many investors in Europe as there are in the US. And
Yeah.
so that lead generation engine, as it's driven through kind of that referral network, founders, referring other founders, that's probably where I think we get the bulk of our inbound in terms of deals here in Europe. So it is a little bit different, but it is catching up, although it's still quite a bit away.
Do you find that the fact that you were really an operator, that you have a long history of actually you've done so much consulting work on strategy for your whole life, and then you've actually been successful starting multiple companies and then having exits with them. Do you find that they're looking for that more so than like a typical financial investor?
No, if I've got that level of insight just yet.
Yeah.
I would say it's a little bit both. I'm not real sure, like, at least from a European perspective, I don't know if they're as savvy enough, you have to understand exactly what they are looking for, right? Because when you're a first time founder, you're not really sure. You don't really know if you're really looking for operational experience yet. I think when you're a first time founder, in particular, you're looking for someone who can guide you through that fundraising process, right?
Gotcha.
What do I need to do? How do I make sure I got the best terms? How do I make sure you got the best structure on my deals? How do I bring in the right people? How do I make sure that I'm positioned for another round of funding without complicating my cap table? I don't know if they're necessarily looking for, hey, who's the investor who's going to bring me a lot of operational experience?
Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
say that once they've started, once they're in it, once they've gotten to that point where maybe they've gone from 0 to 1 and they're stuck, I think they at that point in time start to realize, oh man, I've got a board that's full of a bunch of financial wizards, but
Right.
they're not super insightful in terms of very specific and very deep operational challenges. And I think that's where, founders start to realize, okay, maybe that's where we need some more, operational experience. So I don't know if they're necessarily savvy enough, but I think that's probably true for any first time founder, regardless of whether they're in Europe or the US.
Well, I think the other thing too is there's 2 aspects to working with a VC first time is one is the pitch. How do I pitch them to get excited and they give me money? Not thinking, okay, now I have a partner
Right.
and a startup is going to go through crazy ebbs and flows and near death experiences. And how am I going to, I got the money, but now how do I manage that personal relationship in a way that is productive and helps me grow, and that I don't alienate it and work myself out of a job. So I think that those are 2 distinct universes when you're a first time founder that you get into. What in particular are you looking at when you're because you do come from an operator background, which is a little bit different. How do you assess whether you think an opportunity, at least in your world, would be good in terms of the founding team?
So, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think every investor will answer this a bit differently. But having gone through multiple experiences of starting my own companies and being involved in the startup world as an operator, in numerous companies as well, like I kind of understand those ebbs and flows and what's needed to get through them. So I look for individuals. Obviously, perseverance and determination are critical, but
Yeah,
I really look for those individuals who have truly been through really, really difficult challenges and have figured out how to get through them. And I'm not talking about I had to pull an all nighter to study for my exam and I got through it. I'm talking about like, my first company, I was $500,000 in debt. I couldn't pay my employees and I had to let them all go. And this is what I did. I was on a ferry leaving Indonesia and it sunk and I was surrounded by sharks and I managed to survive and I landed on an island. I'm looking
is
I'm
this
looking for
real or
those
is this a movie?
that could be a movie, but I'm looking for those experiences that give me, and it could be, you mentioned it earlier, it's, high performing athletes as well. Show me that you've been through something that really requires a different level of mindset, a different level of, how do you exercise your brain into believing you can actually get through a situation so precarious or so challenging that like most people would just give up, right? Because I know that no matter what you do from a startup perspective, you're
Yeah,
going to hit those lows, right? Can you not only pick yourself up the first time, but like the second, third, fourth, 10th, 30th time that happens, can you continuously do that? Because it wears you down.
yeah, it's a
It
grind for
absolutely
sure.
wears you down, and you got to have something that keeps you going. And so I try to look for that,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just a single question. Oh, tell me about like, a very difficult experience you went through because you get that, and then people will answer stuff like, well, one time I had 3 exams on one day, and I pulled this all nighter, and I didn't know how I did it, but I managed it. I got all A's. I'm just like, okay, that's how I would have answered that question when I was 23 or 24,
Yeah.
right? So I look for that sort of that reality that someone can actually truly be persistent and determined and get through the crap.
I've never asked this of investor, but I'll ask you right now, which is, have you ever found people who have literally everything they touched is gold? Like they've never really had, like they've just been successful. They work really hard. They're really bright. They haven't had horrible life failures. They haven't had terrible life failures. They are just really successful. So you don't know what's going to happen. But have you met people like that where everything turns to gold pretty much? and they just haven't had the big one yet where they've gotta, get back up from being knocked down?
I thought that was me, but before I started Mouse Driver,
That's all 25-year-olds, I
I
think.
thought I thought everything, like when I was coming out of Wharton, I mean, I thought no matter what I did, it would turn to gold, right?
Yeah.
Here I was, I'd had a pretty good, from I guess up until I was 28, through Wharton, I'd had a pretty good life. Like everything I did was relatively easy, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yes, I put forth effort. I had to try. I had to put in a lot of work,
Of
particularly around
course, yeah.
sports and
But it kind of always
academics.
worked
But
out. Yeah.
yeah, and so when you graduate from Wharton, man, I mean, they put you on a pedestal. No matter what you do, you feel like it's going to turn to gold. And that's what we thought when we started Mouse Driver, which is basically a computer mouse that looks like the head of a driver golf club. We're not talking like rocket science here. And that was one of the hardest things we've ever done. Like Kyle and I were sitting there, my business partner, trying to figure out, like, we've got 5,000 computer mice stacked up from floor to ceiling in our apartment in Cow Hollow in San Francisco. How do we sell this? Right? Like that was hard. And we went like $100,000 in credit card debt, not once, but twice.
Wow.
And, 9 months into this venture, we were like, yeah, this isn't really turning to the gold we thought. Now it ended up being okay. I think, well, one, if it, at my age now, with my experience, if I were to meet somebody at my age now who everything is easy for them, I'd be a little scared because at some point in time, the shoe drops,
Yeah,
right?
for
Like
sure. You live
you
long
just
enough.
can't go through life, with nothing bad really happening,
Yeah.
right? And that scares me because how are they going to react when something does happen this bad? Like, are they going to be able to pick themselves up? Or are they going to just freak out because, oh my gosh, this has never happened to me?
Yeah. I think also the greatest gains that we have in life is overcoming the setbacks. I mean, and you think about the things that you've enjoyed most, the biggest successes that you've had, you feel that joy because of all the agony that you went through and
Yes.
all the durability and sticking with it when everybody said you can't. That's what makes great versus good is you have to have those setbacks. You have to, do things differently. And so I think that is pretty exciting when you're an entrepreneur and you see someone who has, like you said, they've laid it all out there. They've used every possible mileage points they have on their credit cards. They're maxed out. They've borrowed money from their dad.
Yep.
They're eating ramen noodles and water. We always hear those stories, but that I have met people too who they started companies and they made a ton of money and they did really, really well. And so assessing that's pretty interesting. Was there like one big lesson? I know you've got this diversified career that's gone back for a long time. Was there one like lesson that you really learned that you've now brought forward as maybe a key thing or experience that you always look for in assessing whether you think somebody's going to be great?
I don't know if there's a single key lesson
Yeah.
that I'm looking for. I tend to lean in more towards people that have failed,
Okay. Interesting.
right? And not necessarily in starting a company, but failed in something,
Yeah.
right? Because if they've failed and they're continuing to press forward, it tells me that they have this ability to pick themselves back up, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to investing in entrepreneurs, like I like to understand, okay, from a business perspective, what have you done that didn't work out, right?
Right.
And if I find out that they have something that didn't work out, I kind of go deep into that to understand kind of what really happened because I do like I like folks that have failed. And in Europe, it's a bit harder to find those folks. In America, in the States, we're kind of taught from day one that, like, whatever you believe in, you can achieve, right? You
Right.
just go out, work hard. If you fail, pick yourself back up. Failing is learning, keep going. Failing is like a badge of honor in the valley. In parts of Europe, you fail, you'll never get a bank account again, or you're kind of ostracized from the community. So here in Europe, if someone has failed in the business world and they're doing it again, like that tells me a lot. And so I do tend to look for that.
Are they more reserved about that given what you just told me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas here,
Yeah.
it's like, this is my fifth company and this is going to be the big one. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
great. You've got perseverance. That's a trait that we look for. But there you're like, hey, I don't want to tell this guy who's going to give me some money that I failed twice. He's going to think I'm a failure.
Yeah. No, it's, well, one, it's more risk averse here.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, for
so
sure.
most people aren't taking that chance. And two, depending on where you are, but there are some Eastern European countries where, if you start a coffee shop, it doesn't work out, it'll be very hard for you to get a bank account or get a loan again.
Wow. Wow.
So it depends. Obviously, there's lots of countries in Europe. It depends on where you're coming from, but it's much more risk averse than the U.S. The U.S. is very much a risk taking society, right? Particularly
Yeah.
around business, around
Right.
innovation. Individuals aren't afraid to fail. Now that is getting better in Europe, but it's a cultural mentality, and that sort of mentality takes decades to sort of change.
Yeah.
And so you don't have quite that level of risk taking here.
Do you find when you're talking to European entrepreneurs that they have this deep desire to learn what it's like in the United States, the entrepreneurial world that we have here?
Yeah, particularly on the technology
Yeah,
side, I
because
think.
As an American, that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think, particularly the entrepreneurs that are technology entrepreneurs, I think if they can't get to, the Valley or the West Coast or New York or Boston or Austin or, pick wherever you want to go, they want to try to figure out how can they have as similar of experience here in Europe as they can, right?
Yeah,
Around different companies, around different individuals. I think a lot of them have studied. They're reading the tech crunches. They're reading, everything about, they're getting the same news,
yeah,
right? They're reading it. So I do think that I don't know if they want to necessarily emulate the Valley.
yeah,
You can't really emulate the Valley. In some cases, you probably don't want to emulate the Valley, but they want that level of energy. They want that speed of execution. And so I do think that a lot of the entrepreneurs over here, particularly on the tech side, kind of want to aspire to having that similar feeling, maybe with more of a European bent to it.
yeah. We talked a little bit about your own athletic background, being a semi-pro soccer player. As I said early in the podcast, there's certain characteristics about high-level athletes that are great for leadership, for
Hmm.
entrepreneurialism, for sales, that idea of you're able to take criticism. All great athletes have lots of coaches, and they have to take criticism. They focus on the numbers, the statistics, right? Because they are always measuring their performance, measuring their growth, which is also very important when you have a startup company, being able to look at that data, measure it, and then be honest about it. They're usually pretty good at working in teams as
Yeah.
well. And they tend to be very ambitious, always looking for ways to get better. Um, how did that experience really help you as an operator in your entrepreneurial journey that you went through, and then how you look at some of the potential teams that you're going to invest in today?
Yeah, I mean, I take a tremendous amount of the way I build teams and manage teams off of the soccer pitch. So that was my sport, and I was, on the pitch, I was a very different person than I was off the pitch, right? So I was
Yeah,
one of those athletes where my personality changed when I was playing my sport, and I turned into a very vocal leader, a motivator, an inspirer, someone who was very vocal and holding people accountable, but also bringing them back up if they failed. And I use all that in my team building and in the way I manage my teams. Right. So if you're on a team, particularly a high performing team, everybody has a role, and if somebody slips out of the role, there's always a backup. Right. And everybody kind of knows
right.
how the moving parts fit. So I'm always looking for those individuals who kind of know how to play within that team environment, which is also how do you hold others accountable, right? And you mentioned it a while ago, but like they're always learning, but they're always learning from their teammates as well. So I took a lot of what I learned, participating in teams, playing soccer, how I motivate, how I try to inspire, how I try to align people around our visions. A lot of that is driven completely off what I learned from age probably 6 to 24,
Yeah.
playing soccer
And I'm sure you share that in many conversations you have, being a
all the
soccer
time.
player. If you were I don't know, take a US sport that's not popular global, probably wouldn't have the same effect. Fortunately for you living in Europe, you happen to be very good at the most global
I
sport.
could Yeah, yeah, I could probably use basketball as well here, right? This is pretty
Yeah.
big too. So, but yeah, to your point, I mean, I really do take a lot of what I learned from athletics and sports into the way that I build, manage, and assess
Yeah.
teams.
I think a lot of what sometimes people overlook about athletes is you have to celebrate your wins. So you have a long season depending upon the sport. Some wins are more important than others, but you're going through the year or your season and you have moments where you're celebrating these small wins, right? As you build to the climax postseason. And I think that's an important thing when you look at startup companies. The ones that really celebrate their small wins and get
Yeah.
that buy-in from the team. Because it just can't be we're waiting for this one big goal before we celebrate and then we're just burning the midnight oil. I don't think you develop a sense of camaraderie that way. You have to celebrate your success. And just as, having played sports and having kids that play sports at high levels, you feel that it was a relatively insignificant game, but somebody did great today, or we did better than we thought we would.
Yeah.
And that celebration, if we do celebrate it, gets us to the next morning in a positive, exciting light. And I think that's another thing that sports brings into the equation that maybe those who never played sports, had that experience as a team would not know of.
Yep. Absolutely. That's probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned
Yeah.
over the years is making sure you do celebrate those small wins, and how
Yeah.
do you drive that from kind of the ground up? How do you let your team kind of let you know when it's time to celebrate the small wins as well, right? And going with the flow there.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. Tell me about, Promus Ventures. What are you guys working on today? What's really exciting? I know we talked earlier about space as kind of as the old Star Trek thing went, space, the next frontier. I think we're seeing it every day. People are becoming more aware that, space is a means of gathering information and then doing analytics for how we operate, here back on Earth is becoming more mainstream. What's exciting you the most today as an investor, particularly over in Europe?
I think space is still very exciting for us. I mean, I think we're still kind of at that inflection point. You saw kind of the first step of the inflection point around 2012, and again around 2019 to 21. Then it took a little bit of a hiatus, and then it's coming back up. With Rocket Lab, Planet Labs, even Spire, I think is up almost 120% over the last
Yeah,
3 weeks. There's still a lot to run on space. I think if you think about space in terms of data collection and data, and you think all the way downstream to analytics, to get from collecting that data to the downstream analytics, you have to have that data infrastructure. The data infrastructure for me is still really in play. How do you ingest data? How do you build data into workflows? How do you make sure data is high quality? So there's a lot of work that goes into that, a lot of tools, a lot of approaches to making that happen. And again, that just feeds that downstream analytics component, which is, of
okay.
course, the critical component of AI. Health tech is still something that I think is got a long, long tail to it, particularly
Of
around
course.
longevity. I think now that you're getting into the predictive analytics, which is AI, is really enabling that. Companies like Whoop, who are now integrating into a lot of data history. Medical history can take your current data and your medical data and then start to predict, hey, this could happen, this might happen, this is what you need to do to protect it. I think we're getting into a completely different era of how data is being utilized. Everything from basically just looking at the past data, telling you what's happened, to now truly getting into that predictive analytics. So we continue to focus there, data infrastructure, space. And then, of course, robotics is still a big play for us. We've got a couple of companies, Mitra, they're outside of Oakland, and then we've got Robco, which is out of Munich, which are doing various solutions around robotics. Again,
Yeah.
integrating AI into that and collecting data from various points as well. So we continue to kind of focus on really things that we called building atoms. So things that are hard, and collecting that with sort of the software component, and bringing them together.
Is, are these, investments you're making have high capital requirements, because you're building physical things in some cases, or is it more like software for you guys? So, for example, we talk about space, nano satellites. Are you guys actually funding the development of the actual hardware that goes up in space, or are you providing the information analytical layer as a software platform?
It's really more, I mean, our sweet spot is when you combine atoms with bytes, or
Atoms with
atoms with
bytes.
bits, right? Atoms with bits. So yes, we are investing in companies that are still more focused on deeper capex investments, hard
Yeah.
tech type stuff. And then, of course, we were really attracted to the ones that are now incorporating the software and the analytics and the AI into that stuff. But for us, deep tech is really about, like, the complexity of that capex, which makes
Yeah.
things a little bit more difficult to perform on.
Well, I think you mentioned too, when we talk about the expansion of the universe and going into space and all these like Star Trek and Asimov type of theories, but our bodies are universes too. And as you mentioned, we're moving more where biometrics is becoming more important and the ability to have devices connected with us physically and then combining all that together to provide real-time analytics. I think someone said once that if you talk to a very successful CEO, the person could probably tell you every single metric, every point of data for the company. And you ask them, well, what's the same thing for your body? And they don't know anything except my LDL, my HDL, my blood pressure seems
Right.
to X, Y, and Z. And I know I fit. My wife is a dedicated, diehard Whoop wearer. First one to do
Yeah.
it.
Nice.
I got
Nice.
seduced into the Aura Ring only because knowing me, I'll catch the Whoop on my wrist every second. And the ring is for her. She doesn't like the feeling of the ring. For me, I don't feel the ring. So that's the direction we've gone. But I've
Right.
seen with all the different things now, where eventually I see people I know are wearing the trackers on their arms, where they're looking at they're looking at what's happening with the food they put in their body, what glycemic changes are happening inside of there. All those things that are physically attached to you are now being integrated into these other devices, whether it's Whoop or Ring, and you can look at where you are every day. Now, it may create a greater sense of paranoia every day if you're looking at what's going on in your body every second. But I just see the AI and these capabilities looking at our bodies as a universe, as well as expanding our thoughts about beyond our world and space and things of that nature. So it's just a fascinating time to live. I mean, it's incredible.
No, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And
I
it's
wish I were
changing so
30 years
fast.
younger. Don't you wish you were 30 years younger?
I don't,
Because
oh no.
the things your daughter is going to see is just we can't even imagine it. When you go back and you say, "Gosh, the iPhone." Can you imagine? A young person can't imagine life without an iPhone, maybe the way our generation couldn't imagine people sitting around a radio versus television. But, to think there's like 20, 25 years ago, none of this stuff even existed blows your mind. And to think that those gains are nothing compared to what we're gonna see in the next decade.
What's crazy, particularly around, software development is like, I'm not going to say you did software built to last. It's not to Jim Collins, but you did build software to iterate. But it would take you, months to launch new software, and now, like as soon as you launch something, a week later, things change. So
Yeah.
everything that you're launching, you should be launching knowing that you're going to throw that away and build something better in a week. So like it's it's
It's it
completely changing. It's a really different mindset now in terms of software development, right?
Well, that part makes it really difficult as an investor because you used to be able to say, "Hey, this is going to be at least the life expectancy, and we can look at the cash flows from that and build it backwards and figure out what about a valuation should be at the present value point." But like you said, you're investing in a software company, and 6 months down the road, things could be changing dramatically from an investment perspective. That's a big challenge.
1 week.
Well, that's why I
I
say
mean, things.
go deep into the hardware side now. It's funny,
Right,
isn't it? Like
exactly, exactly.
everyone went from hardware to software. You remember that? They're saying, "Get out of the
Yeah,
hardware, go into software." And now I think we're realizing as that's changing, people are going back into hardware, to satellites, into robotics, into devices, where making those things, you're gonna get a longer lifespan because the capital intensive aspect of investing in those. So
yeah,
very
yeah,
different world we're in.
exactly.
Well, John,
It's crazy.
this has been a lot of fun. I like to end this podcast, Venture to Victory, with the same question. I'll throw that out to you. And then, what does it mean to you, whether it's in business, whether it's in family, life, whatever, to truly be victorious?
I think for me, it's being able to look back. There's two things probably. One is being able to look back and know that I had a level of impact somewhere. Did I create something that was sustainable? Can I point to something when I'm like 80 years old and said, you know what, I had a part in that. So that's one thing that's kind of always driven me. The other one, which is a bit more altruistic, is what's the impact that I can have on somebody else, right? And this goes back to my teaming example earlier. I'm a motivator and inspirer as a leader. That's the type of leader I am. I like to see people doing things that they don't think that they can do, succeeding when they don't think that they can, and knowing that I help them get to that point.
Yeah,
Right. And if you read the Mouse Driver Chronicles, that the whole rationale for writing that book was that we wanted to write something that would inspire others to kind of take this entrepreneurial plunge and have a similar experience as we did because we learned so much. And so
yeah,
if I know that I've had an impact on others, and that can be anything from, I've helped them somehow in their life, or I've helped them go start another business, I've inspired them to do something great, or I've inspired them to travel. I just want to know that I've had that impact.
yeah. I know that when you're younger, and I see this all the time, but obviously I'm involved as with clients that are startup companies. So many of them, they always talk about they want to make an impact, but they're coming from it when they're young. just this vision of wanting to do something positive in their life. When you get a little bit older, maybe in our age range, you start looking back and saying, you start to feel that anxiety that if I didn't make an impact, maybe I didn't fulfill my purpose here on life. Like,
Right.
what was it all about if I didn't do something valuable for somebody else? And it's just funny when you're young, it's more of an ethereal, rhetorical question. Like, I want to make an impact. I want to do something valuable. But when you get older, it becomes almost a sense of desperation. Like you start looking back at your life and saying, what did I do of true value? And it always leads back to helping other people out. I hope one day when it's lights out and then it's lights back on, that's what I believe. You see the interconnectedness of all these small things that we did where you maybe really changed the direction of somebody's life, where you came into their life at a moment where they really needed the message that you gave them. A friend of mine once said that the four most powerful words in the world are, I believe in you. Just saying that at the right time to the right person can change everything. So I love your answer on it.
Yeah,
Really
that's great
awesome.
advice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much. I hope you make it back to the States sooner than later. If not, if I make it to Luxembourg, if anyone's out there and you're running a business, you're a startup founder, and you want to know what Luxembourg is all about, where can somebody reach you, John?
No, they can reach me at John at Promus Ventures. So and we invest in the US too. Our funds are, across continents, but they can just send me an email at John at Promus Ventures.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate you and look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Thanks. Cheers.
Take care.
The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.